So when you think of Victorian literature, what pops into your head? Probably stuffy drawing rooms. Super strict social rules, right? Well, today we're going to pull back that lace curtain and introduce you to some of the era's biggest troublemakers. Let's dive in. Look, we all know the big names, but this explainer is all about the writers who were really pushing the envelope. We're going to meet two authors who challenged the very foundations of their society. One did it through some seriously fearless social commentary, and the other, well, he was busy building entirely new worlds for us to get lost in. First up, we have Anne Bronte. Now, you've definitely heard of the Bronte sisters, but Anne was often seen as the quiet one, kind of living in the shadow of Charlotte and Emily. But here's the thing. In reality, her work was maybe the most radical of them all.
This quote right here, it's describing Helen Graham, the hero of Anne's novel, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and it just perfectly captures the heart of her rebellion. Helen isn't some damsel in distress waiting for a hero. Nope. She takes charge of her own life, which, let me tell you, was a truly revolutionary idea back then.
That's right. A book from 1848 is now considered one of the very first feminist novels. So, what on earth made it so shocking and so important? I mean, just look at this list. The sheer audacity to write about these things in the 1840s is incredible. Bronte didn't just hint at them. She put them right out there front and center. Her main character, Helen, literally slams the door on her abusive alcoholic husband to save herself and her son. In a time when married women had basically zero legal rights, this was like setting off a bomb.
And yeah, as you can probably guess, it caused a massive scandal. Critics were appalled by its coarse and brutal honesty about a bad marriage. But that backlash is exactly what proves how rebellious she was. Today, we don't see that as a flaw. We see it as her greatest strength.
Okay, let's pivot to our second rebel, a totally different but just as influential figure, Edward Bulwer-Lytton. So if Bronte rebelled against social conventions, Bulwer-Lytton rebelled against literary ones. He was a true architect of fiction as we know it.
Sound familiar? Of course it does. This iconic opening line, which gets parodied all the time, was actually written by Bulwer-Lytton for his 1830 novel, Paul Clifford. But believe me, his impact goes way, way beyond one famous phrase.
So check this out. He made a criminal the hero. By making Paul Clifford a character you could actually root for, someone pushed into crime by a totally unfair society, Bulwer-Lytton turned the crime story into a sharp critique of the whole legal system.
He was also a master of the historical novel. The Last Days of Pompeii wasn't just some adventure. It was a vivid, painstakingly researched deep dive into Roman life. He perfectly blended historical facts with page-turning drama and pretty much set the template for the genre.
And just when you think you've got him pegged, he goes and helps pioneer science fiction. We're talking years before H.G. Wells. Bulwer-Lytton was already exploring things like utopian societies, futuristic tech, and the dangers of ultimate power. The Coming Race was a huge influence on early sci-fi.
This timeline just says it all, doesn't it? The range is just staggering. From social satire to psychological thrillers, from mystical stories to sci-fi, this guy's career was all about innovation. He absolutely refused to be put in a box.
So what do we have? Two very different writers, the sharp social critic and the prolific genre hopper. So what's the common thread? Well, let's take a look at how their rebellious legacies have evolved.
Now this is where it gets really fascinating. Anne Bronte, who was once written off for being too scandalous, is now praised for that very reason. And Edward Bulwer-Lytton, who was a superstar in his day but later called melodramatic, is now seen as the guy who built the foundations for the books we love. History basically flipped the script on both of them.
So, what's the bottom line here? Anne Bronte's fight for a woman's right to choose her own path is still incredibly inspiring today. And every single time you pick up a detective novel or a sci-fi epic, you're walking in the footsteps of Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Together, they completely shatter that stuffy, one-dimensional image of the Victorian age.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big question. Their stories prove that reputations change and that it can take time to see the true impact of a rebellious voice. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who are the quiet rebels and the unfashionable architects writing today whose work will end up defining our era for generations to come?